Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is from 1981, and it's voiceover, starring Ian McNeice, and directed by Christopher Monger. This is a BFI dual format Blu-ray and DVD release. It has a booklet, and it has Christopher Munger's 1979 film Repeater, which is 76 minutes long, which is an interesting little film, inspired by the Nouvelle Vague. It's about a woman who confesses to a murder, but it's perhaps not as it appears. But we're going to talk about voiceover. Ian McNeice, who you might not recognise the name, but you'll certainly recognise his face. He has been in hundreds of films, usually in supporting roles, but this, as far as I'm aware, is the only film he's in where he is the lead, and he takes full advantage of it, because he goes, it's a role full of gusto, and gives it his all. Christopher Monger went on to make a few films, but they're all kind of romantic comedy, kind of not very interesting films, including the Hugh Grant, The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill and Did Something, which I've never seen, but I remember it coming out at the time. So voiceover is completely different to the other films that Monger made, and it's certainly a whole heap darker. That might be why I like it and why I think you should give it a go. I mean, again, it's a film that's not for everybody, but very few films that are any good actually are. So McNeice plays Fats Bannerman, who works for a radio station, and his show, he essentially narrates this story that he makes up, called Thus Engaged, set in the 18th century. It's about this woman Elizabeth and her romantic life, and it's all about balls, as far as costume balls, not any other kind of balls. It's about balls, and his sound man who does the effects. So it's a small radio station, very low budget, but he seems to have quite an audience, and then he gets an award for best fictional show, and as you can guess, with more success becomes more ego, and he gets a little bit of fame. After they win the award, he goes down and phones up the office pretending to from Time magazine, and then he goes up and answers the phone from Time magazine, and of course says he doesn't have time to interview for Time magazine, and Time magazine doesn't have a good reputation, so he hangs up the phone on them, even though there's nobody there. So he's riding the crest of a wave. His boss is very happy, the advertisers are happy with his success. Seems to have a wide-ranging audience. And then he gets interviewed, and it's obvious that the interviewer is there to basically do a hatchet job. The fact that the audience, according to the interviewer, just listens to his show for the kitschness value of it. According to McNeice, it's studied in university courses, and as the reporter says, well, it's Hull University, and they just look at it, they study it as an outdated form of entertainment, and nobody's really interested in that. People are just listening to it for laughs. So obviously that shakes him to his core, because he actually is obviously proud of himself and proud of, he's getting, attention and awards. He has went through a messy divorce. Apparently, he had a violent marriage, so he's living in this kind of loft, kind of apartment that overlooks the docks. But I mean, there's pretty much no carpets, no hardly any furniture. There's no heating. He's pretty much living day to day, and again, while he walks the streets, and it's really atmospherically shot. Obviously, it's 1981, so it's that period in Britain where it's run down. But in his internal monologue, he's always recording his thoughts of what the next episode of his show is going to be, the adventures of Elizabeth in the 18th century. And again, it's a way of transporting himself to another world and not having to deal with the reality. So it is one of those films about somebody getting into a fantasy world and blurring that line between fantasy and reality. We all love those kind of films, because that's what some of us do anyway. You're not pointing any fingers. So he's shaken by this interview, but they get another award, and he's at a party and ends up with these two younger women who take him back to their flat. And again, then they kind of mention that they've heard his show, and again he's had a bit to drink, but he's kind of puffing his chest out. He's a celebrity. But then they get to a point, they're teasing him about whether Elizabeth's lover in the story is actually gay, or is she a lesbian. They don't seem to have any sex in the story. Obviously, it's the 18th century and sex didn't exist. Partly, sex was only a 20th century invention. If you touched a woman's lace glove, she instantly fell pregnant in the 18th century. So again, he starts at the beginning of this scene where he goes to their house. He thinks perhaps he might get lucky, but obviously it turns into they're just there to ridicule him and abuse him and then throw him out. So again, he's struggling with, he thought he was on top of the world, and obviously now he's not. And then on top of this, a couple of nights later, he's coming home and he finds one of these women lying in the rubbish, who has a wound and has been attacked. We don't know whether it's a sexual assault or just a physical assault, but she is in shock. She is not speaking. So he takes her back to his apartment. He contacts a doctor. He doesn't phone the police or an ambulance. He contacts a doctor friend who tells him she really needs, obviously, to go to a hospital or go to an institution because she's in shock. She's not really responding. She's still alive, but she's not really responding. And I mean, it gets a bit silly in the fact that he then pays the doctor off to kind of patch her up, but he's going to keep her in the flat. So this is, he is aware that she is one of the women that kind of taunted him and made fun of him and kicked him out. It's interesting because we never find out who actually attacked her and left her essentially for dead in a rubbish pile. So there's always that doubt, well, maybe he actually attacked her in the first place. Again, the doctor kind of brings up, oh, your violent marriage, and that's why he doesn't want kind of the authorities involved because they might think he did it. And it would become so he chooses to keep her in his flat and try and um, rehabilitate her by listening to his radio show, listening to him talking, because he's always about talking and using language and the power of language, and he kind of views himself as kind of superior to the others because he uses language. Even though, again, during interview, the interviewer is like, well, people have actually studied your episodes, and a lot of it seems to be lifted from like the works of Jane Austen, and there's kind of lots of plagiarism. And of course, he's like, of course not, that's not what I do. You know, maybe I read a lot of that when I was at school, and maybe it's permeated into it, but he doesn't do that. So he kind of takes all of this and decides he's going to change it slightly. So it becomes, he adds vampirism into the story, which initially his boss is not happy about, but strangely enough, the ratings seem to go up. So he adds more, vampirism into the story. He adds more blood and gore into the story, and the ratings are going up. All the time he's going home to this woman who is trying to recover. She's still in shock. She's not speaking. So the film becomes him trying to get her to recover for whatever reason. You can read into that however you like. And him changing the dynamic of the show. It gets further and further away from what it started as. And his boss at the radio station at some point can't take any more, so he goes to a bigger radio station who just loves all that sensationalism and gives him a free rein. But again, the line between reality and fantasy kind of blur. His shows get more and more kind of challenging, more and more kind of experimental, as his inner dialogue about the power of speech and the power of the voice compared with this woman who can't speak and is still in shock. He gets a new house because he's getting paid more money, so they move in there in separate rooms until obviously it develops, and I'm going to stop there. It's funny because watching it and then looking up the films that Munger did later, voiceover is a complete outlier as far as tone. Also, it's a really cheap film, even though it's on Blu-ray. There's a lot of damage to the print because it's just amazing that BFI actually found a print to start with. Again, it's one of the Flipside BFI releases. It's number 21 in the Flipside range. So the picture is not perfect. It's like 4:3 ratio. It's almost like a TV film, really. I don't know whether it actually got a theatrical release or not. But it's an interesting little film. Again, it has that underlying thing about excuse me. It has that underlying thing about art versus commerce. The advertisers aren't liking the way the show's going, and can you change it up, and that kind of thing. Pressure between art and commerce. And then he goes to the second radio station, which is like, oh yeah, you'll get free reign, you'll do what you like. Yeah, it's always up to a point. Again, McNeice is wonderful in it. Again, he's pretty much always just a little character actor. In a lot of his films, he'll get bumped off halfway through. So it's fun to see him actually being the lead and having a whale of a time and really going for it. again, it's an interesting little film. Not for everybody, but again, most of my random reviews aren't for everybody. And again, films that are for everybody generally aren't really that interesting. I think you can pick it up pretty cheaply, and it's well worth a little look. And you get, like I said, you get Repeater, Monger's film from 1979 as well, which is about 76 minutes. So thanks very much for watching this random review. Please let me know in the comments below if you've seen voiceover and what you thought of it, or what your favourite Ian McNeice role is, performance. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.